Thanks for joining us for another episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified with myself, your co-host, Joe Curry, and my co-host, Lindsay Wilson. How are you today, Lindsay?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. We're trying out our new podcast recording platform. So
Riverside, that's right. Better audio, better quality. So it's an exciting day.
Yeah, and also I guess we should mention that, part of the reason we made this switch is because with our YouTube channel now, we're putting up these as videos on YouTube. So you'll find them on social media and YouTube. So hopefully we look just a little bit crisper.
That's right. Yes, and the sound is just a little bit sharper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything new in your world, Lindsay?
Just busy planning that client event that I mentioned last time, our e-cycling identity event. So excited about that coming up next month.
Awesome. That's great.
How about you, Joe?
Anything exciting? Well, I guess we're doing my mom's 60th birthday party tomorrow, or I guess what day is today? Saturday. So it's kind of a surprise party with her sisters and their husbands, and my wife, my brother, and his wife. So anyway, we're doing I guess it's like a learning to make pasta, like cooking class, like interactive. So we're going to do a whole bunch of different pastas, and we'll have a bunch of wine and all that kind of stuff. Because they were supposed to go to Italy a couple weeks ago, but then my aunt, she was bumped into, anyways, long story, but ended up breaking her 2 bones in her legs and 1 bone in her wrist. And so they had to cancel the trip. So anyway, so we're trying to take into consideration her because she's coming. And so they all missed Italy. So we're making it kind of like an Italian celebration. So it should be fun.
That sounds wonderful. What a great way to celebrate.
Yeah, it should be good. So I guess on with our topic today. So we're going to do a couple of listener questions.
Yeah, we had a couple of listeners reach out, and we thought this might be a good time to let everybody know if you do have questions. If you want to reach out to us, you can of course visit our retirementplanningsimplified.ca webpage, and you can always email info@retirementplanningsimplified.ca, and we're happy to field any and all questions. And so of course I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's something we'd like to do a little bit more of. Obviously we're putting this podcast out, hopefully bringing good information to our listeners. And at the end of the day, though, you know what you want to learn more than anybody. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to let us know, and we'll start to feature some more of these questions as we go.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think we should dive in. So I think this is a great question. When should I start planning for retirement?
Yeah, so great question. I'll give you 2 answers to that. So one is as soon as possible, right? Ideally, you start planning as soon as you have free cash flow. So we could be talking, way younger than what our kind of average age of our audience is here right now. And just the only thing I want to point out on that is the power of compounding. So if you're 25 years old and you started putting away $100 a week, and you did that until you were age 65, and you got an 8% average rate of return over that kind of year over year, you'd have over $1.3 million, and you would only have actually contributed to your investment accounts $200,000. So I thought I'd throw that example in there just to show the people the power of compounding and why it's so important to start early if you can. But that said, for this podcast, our listeners are usually much closer to retirement than age 25. And so ideally, when we start thinking about actually having concrete plans for retirement, ideally we're starting 3 or 4 years out from retirement. There's a few things we want to be looking at, right? So we have created the Retirement Navigator, which we've mentioned a few times. You can get at our website. And the Retirement Navigator, or talking to a financial planner, is a really good place to start at that kind of 3 or 4 years out. And the first thing we really want to do is you want to get clear on your values. You want to get clear on your purpose, not just today, but what that purpose is going to be once you're no longer working or working in a different way, whatever that next stage looks like for you. So if we can get clear on that, then you can start backing that into, what do the financials need to look like? So, on a monthly basis, what are expenses looking like? Depending on what some of those priorities or purposes are going to be in retirement, there may be expenses associated with those. Maybe adventure is a really important value for you. So maybe you want to make sure you're doing a lot more kind of adventure type plans in retirement. So travel and things like that. So, you might end up seeing expenses going up. But at least now you can start to get an idea of what it's going to look like. And then you can start seeing, okay, so now that we know, here's what it's going to look like when we get to retirement. We can say, okay, here's where we are today. So start taking inventory on what things look like right now. So what are you going to have for retirement? Have you been saving? Do you have retirement accounts, non-registered accounts? Do you have tax-free accounts? Do you have pensions? Are you going to get Canada Pension Plan? All that kind of stuff starts giving you a framework for what you can expect in retirement. And then you can start closing the gap. So what do you need to do to get from where you are today to where you're going to need to be financially a few years down the road, right? And so for some of our listeners, the whole reason they're listening right now is because they can do some of that on their own, and that's great. So those are the things you should be thinking about. But for others, you should be talking to a financial planner, ideally someone specializing in helping people make that transition from working into retirement or work optional life. So the next step is, once you've figured all that out, then you can decide, okay, if we can't just through savings over the next few years get to where we need to be, we can pull on those retirement levers we've talked about in other episodes. So, are you willing to spend less in retirement? Are you willing to work longer, right? Do you want to do some part-time work? Obviously save even more, but that means reducing lifestyle expenses probably more at this point. So there's some things to weigh there, right? But those are some of the levers that you can pull if you're not where you need to be. Now, I also know a lot of our listeners are kind of where they need to be, and they're really thinking about that next step and how do they get, I guess, take that planning to the next level. So the next thing I'd say is when you're 1 to 2 years out, definitely at least 1 year out, you need to start thinking about, are these plans you've been making from a cash flow standpoint, are they realistic? So how do we do that? Well, we just simulate what retirement's going to look like financially. So when we figure out what you're going to have available to retire on for monthly income, ideally what we're going to do is we're actually going to take all the income you have coming in while you're working. We're going to take all that, we're going to put it into a separate account. And then what you're going to do is from that separate account, each month, you're going to move money from there into your regular checking account where you do all your spending. And the idea here is that you're going to get used to living on that amount of money you're able to sustain through retirement. And you're going to get a good idea of whether you could actually live on it or if you need to go back to the drawing plan for your retirement spending and retirement goals, right? So maybe you'll get there and realize, you know what, for my day-to-day, I actually was right on, but I missed all these kind of one-off things I hadn't really thought about. And so now we need to say, okay, do we need to pull one of the retirement levers? Do we need to just, reduce spending in some other areas? But at least you're going to know that before you leave your job. Okay. So I think that's probably a pretty good answer, I hope. Lindsay,
Yeah,
maybe you could be the
absolutely.
judge of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, earlier is better. But again, I think the question, the context of the question is really about like, when do we start really thinking concrete about what the next steps are to make sure we can get into retirement?
So we're on the road to retirement. We're on the road to saving for retirement. What are the best retirement accounts for Canadians? That was another listener question that had come up.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a number of different ways where people can invest and save for retirement. Now, we've probably talked on earlier podcasts about some of the different retirement income sources, which is kind of like a backwards way of looking at what these accounts are. Okay, so you can find that. Maybe, Lindsay, we can add that to the show notes, those episode numbers. But basically, there's a few things that we're looking at here. Fortunately, the government has given us some more tax-advantaged opportunities for saving for retirement. So the most common one in Canada is the RRSP, or Registered Retirement Savings Plan, right? And so the advantage of that is you get to take a certain amount of your income, up to 18% each year, and you can add it into the RRSP, and you get a deduction off of your income. So if you have $100,000 of income, let's say that you put $10,000 into your RRSP, you're only going to pay tax this year on $90,000. So one of the advantages of that is once you're no longer working, or at least not in the capacity you're working in now when you're fully employed and peak earning years, is that once you get to retirement and you start to take that money back out, you do have to pay tax. It's fully taxable, but you're more than likely going to be in a lower tax bracket, right? So usually when we're maxing out or putting big chunks of money into those RRSPs, it's in our higher income earning years, which is almost always, for most people, a higher income tax bracket than when we are in retirement. So that's kind of the go-to for looking after your own savings for retirement. The flip side of that is the tax-free savings account. And for the tax-free savings account, you can put money in this year at $6,500, and this accumulates over time, right? So if you didn't put money in last year, you get that contribution room again this year. So anyway, so you can put that in, new money, $6,500 this year. You don't get a deduction off of your income, but it grows completely tax-free. And when you take it out of that account, unlike the RSP, you don't pay tax when you take it out, which is also potentially advantageous in retirement if there's periods where you need some additional income, but you are worried about maybe going into a higher tax bracket or having an old age security clawback, things like that affect your income. So you can take out of the tax-free savings account withdrawals, and it is not considered income for any of those income tested benefits. And one thing I didn't mention with the RRSP is that anything growing in there is growing tax deferred, right? So you do pay tax when you take it out, but any interest, dividends, gains, anything happening in those accounts, you're not actually paying any tax on. So those are kind of the two most common. Of course, there is your kind of similar to the RSPs, but your work pension or group RRSPs. So there's a defined contribution pension, which is very much like a group RRSP. And generally what's happening there is your employer is promising to match a certain amount of what you're putting into those retirement accounts. So you put the money in and you're getting the deduction off that income. And then to some extent, your employer is matching the amounts going in there. So that's really the best place to start if you have that option, right? So if you have your personal RSP and you have that group RSP or defined contribution pension, you want to take advantage of the matching first, right? Any free money you can get, do that first. And if you still have some additional kind of excess cash flow that you can invest above and beyond that, that's where you would start using the personal accounts, okay? But otherwise, those kind of work the same. So even though defined contribution pension has the word pension in it, it's not like when we think of teacher's pension or government pension where it's going to give you a defined paycheck that's month after month for all your retirement. That's a defined benefit pension plan. So that's a little bit different. The defined contribution is a place where you can save with the help of your employer, but you're still ultimately responsible for the investments in there and the returns you get and creating an income out of that in retirement. Okay. We have our just normal non-registered investment accounts. So these are usually the last place we're going to invest when we're saving for retirement, because any dividends are taxable in the year they're claimed, any interest is taxable right away, and any capital gains, you pay tax on 50% of those gains anytime you sell any of your investments that have a gain. So those are, kind of nice to have those accounts in retirement because there's a lot less tax you're paying when you're making withdrawals out of those accounts, but you're not getting that deduction. You're not getting any tax-free or tax-deferred growth in those accounts. But they're still there as another option. So outside of our personal savings, business owners have potentially another opportunity or maybe a couple other opportunities where they can save on a tax-deferred basis. So one is just saving within your corporation. So obviously this is for incorporated business owners. But business taxes business income is taxed at a lower percentage than personal income. Now, the first thing I'll say there is just to keep in mind that if a business owner wants to get that money into their hands personally, they're paying the same tax as everybody else, right? So there's no advantage there as far as the taxes because we have tax integration. So what happens is if you pay yourself a dividend out, it looks like you're getting it at a lower tax rate, but that's because the business already paid that other lower tax rate. So when we put it all together, it's still the same as a personal tax, right? So there's not really an advantage there. But where the advantage is that we can get those dollars invested, paying the lower tax amount, and then investing that full amount. And then later on in retirement, they can take the money out of the corporation and pay the rest of the tax. So that's where that dividend tax would come in, right? So this is very similar to an RSP. So if someone's paying themselves salary and they're a business owner, they have the choice. Do they want to contribute to their RSP or just not pay themselves as much, leave some money in the corporation and invest there? So there's some advantages and disadvantages to each option, and it's usually kind of a personal situation, kind of how we would determine that. And maybe we can do another episode on this at some point, Lindsay. So I won't go any deeper there. But there are those options. A lot of people don't know they can set up an investment account inside their corporation, but we can set it up just like you'd set up an RSP or a personal non-registered account. We can set those accounts up, invest those tax-deferred dollars, and then when you sell your business or move on from the business, you can turn around, create an income out of those investments and pay yourself a dividend, just like you were doing most likely while you were running the business. So that's an option. And then the other one, which is also for business owners, is an individual pension plan or an IPP. So this isn't something we've actually talked about on the podcast before, I don't think. But an IPP, what it does is it basically creates a defined benefit pension for a business owner, right? So I talked about defined benefit pensions a minute ago. So that's like the teacher's pension. So the teachers, the government workers, anywhere else where we have these defined benefit pensions, they're actually contributing more into those accounts than they would be able to if they didn't have those pensions and were putting money into an RSP. So if a business owner sets that up for themselves, it allows them to get that higher contribution room that these other employees would be getting who have the defined benefit pensions. And so I was actually listening to, and we can put this in the show notes too, because Jason Pereira did a good episode on this. But in his podcast, he was talking about how it's actually about 160% of the total contribution room throughout your lifetime compared to your RSP contribution, right? So you could get, if you have those extra dollars and you're looking to get in a tax sheltered vehicle, that's really one way a business owner can increase that. So again, there's a very specific to each situation what your goals are. And again, that's something maybe we'll talk about on another episode of what the IPP is. Mm-hmm. But that pretty well kind of rounds out the options for saving for retirement, right? Beyond actually using investment accounts from a non-registered standpoint, of course, you could also be investing in other things that you don't necessarily put in those accounts, like real estate, things like that. But from investment accounts available in Canada, I think that pretty well sums it up.
Excellent. Well, I think that covers our two listener questions. Again, when should I start planning for retirement, and what are the best retirement accounts for Canadians? Those kind of go hand in hand. So, Joe, any parting thoughts? Any parting advice that you would offer?
And I think it just comes back to what we talked about kind of after our first question. There is really just the earlier you can start planning any of this, the more efficient you'll be in retirement, right? So. If you're a year out from retirement, looking at an IPP probably isn't going to make any sense at that point, right? So if you are having an eye to retirement, you're thinking about this, 10 years out from retirement, then that's a good time where you can still take advantage of these different retirement accounts that we just talked about, or different ways of investing for retirement a lot more efficiently than you can a couple of years out. But taking retirement planning a step deeper into like, what does it concretely, what is it going to look like? That's where we want to be doing that 3 or 4 years out from retirement.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Joe, for imparting that information about planning for retirement.
My pleasure.